Welcome to the deep dive. We've got quite a stack of sources in front of us today,
We do.
all digging into one of the most, persistent figures in ufology, the GREYS.
Ah, yes, the GREYS.
Yeah.
Instantly recognizable.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the type small, big head, those huge dark eyes. But today we're going a bit deeper. We're exploring a theory that really twists the classic alien encounter narrative, makes it almost uncomfortably personal.
Yeah, this isn't just about, visitors from Zeta Reticuli or somewhere.
Right.
This deep dive touches on a really speculative, maybe even grim vision of, our own future.
Our future? How so?
It looks at the potential consequences of where humanity might be heading,
Yeah.
and maybe a desperate mission back through time because of it.
Exactly. So the core idea we're unpacking from all this material is the GREYS as future humans theory.
A fascinating, if unsettling, concept.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the classic description, establish what people report seeing.
Right, the baseline image?
Then we trace the logic of this future human idea, look at the evidence people point to within those abduction accounts,
Okay.
and then, importantly, ground ourselves with the scientific counter-arguments that the sources also cover.
Got it. Bringing it back to what we, can verify or can't.
Yeah, and finally explore why this specific idea seems to resonate so much, why it hits a nerve.
It definitely taps into some current anxieties, doesn't it?
For sure. So consider this our mission. Guide you through this compelling narrative using what's in these sources. Help you see the layers.
Get ready, folks. Might make you look in the mirror a bit differently after this one.
Maybe. Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start with that image, the one most people probably picture immediately. According to the sources, the gray is like the alien archetype, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. The most
Yeah.
recognizable, dominant one in modern accounts, definitely.
So what are the common descriptions? What do these abduction accounts consistently report?
Well, based on the material, what's striking is how consistent the descriptions are, globally even.
Really?
Globally. Yeah. Physically, they're typically described as small, maybe 3 to 5 feet tall, very slender build, almost frail looking.
Okay.
Their skin is usually pale, gray, sometimes grayish white, described as smooth or thin, maybe leathery sometimes.
And the head, that's always prominent, right?
Always. Disproportionately large, totally hairless head. It really dominates the small body.
And the eyes, they're key.
Oh, absolutely key. And probably the most unsettling feature for many. They're described as huge, almond-shaped, and completely black.
Completely black, no pupil, no iris.
Exactly. Seemingly no pupils or irises, just these large, dark pools. It gives them that, cold, detached, almost insect-like stare that people report.
Yeah, it sounds very minimal.
Functional.
That's a good way to put it. Minimal facial features otherwise. Small slit for a mouth, sometimes no lips described, tiny nostrils, and usually no visible ears.
No ears. And their arms and legs are long and thin. Hands typically have like 3 or 4 long, skinny fingers, sometimes reported as slightly webbed.
Okay. And another thing often mentioned.
Right, the lack of any visible genitalia.
Yeah.
It adds to that sort of asexual, almost manufactured look.
It really is a chilling image when you piece it all together.
Definitely.
And their behavior, how do the sources say they interact during these alleged encounters?
Well, interaction is almost never verbal. It's almost exclusively described as telepathic.
Telepathic, like thoughts in your head.
Yeah, exactly. Abductees report thoughts, images, sometimes just cold commands, sort of implanted directly into their minds.
Wow. And their demeanor?
Consistently reported as detached, clinical, cold, utterly emotionless. Like they're just performing a task with, robotic efficiency.
Okay, so this cold, efficient interaction, it leads into the procedures they supposedly perform, right? There's a strong theme there.
Oh, very strong. The sources really emphasize intricate, often invasive medical examinations.
Medical exams. Focused on what?
Frequently, the focus is intensely on reproductive organs. Also brain activity, like they're monitoring thoughts or responses, and collecting genetic samples.
Genetic samples.
Like sperm, ova, skin scrapings, blood, that kind of thing. The classic scenario involves being taken, often from bed at night.
Right. Floating through walls, that story.
Exactly. Transported onto these silent, often disc-shaped crafts, and then subjected to these procedures in rooms described as sterile, brightly lit.
Which leads us to maybe the most disturbing part for many abductees, the whole hybrid agenda concept.
Yes, that's central in a lot of these accounts. The idea that the GREYS are involved in some kind of genetic breeding program.
To create what?
Human-alien hybrids, supposedly. Abductees often report seeing or interacting with these hybrid children. It suggests this long-term, maybe desperate effort at crossbreeding, creating a new lineage using our genetics.
So for decades, the default thinking, fed by pop culture in early cases,
Like Betty and Barney Hill.
right, was that these were just ETs. Ours is mentioned.
Yeah, that was a standard model.
But then this other theory started gaining some traction, one that flips the whole script.
The idea that maybe they weren't alien from somewhere else.
But alien to our time.
Exactly.
So here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, deeply unsettling. The theory we're digging into posits these aren't aliens from another planet at all.
No.
But potentially our own descendants, who somehow come back in time to now.
Precisely. And it paints a really quite terrifying picture of humanity's distant future.
How so? Why would they look like that and come here?
Well, the sources lay out several potential reasons. The core idea is usually some kind of existential crisis facing humanity way down the line. Hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of years from now.
An existential crisis? Like what?
Yeah.
What kind of future problems are we talking?
One major possibility discussed is severe genetic degradation.
Genetic degradation.
Yes.
Meaning
Their gene pool is failing. Could be from accumulated mutations over vast time, maybe environmental damage like radiation exposure, or maybe over-reliance on artificial reproduction.
like cloning or IVF.
Exactly. Maybe they lost the ability to reproduce naturally, or it led to serious health issues. The theory suggests the species is literally dying out biologically.
That's grim. What else?
Another strong possibility is environmental catastrophe. Earth becomes uninhabitable.
You too.
Could be anything. Runaway climate change, nuclear war, pollution, totally out of control, maybe even cosmic events. So humanity is forced underground into sterile bunkers, or maybe off-world into harsh space habitats.
And their bodies adapt to that.
That's the idea. Or there's the technological angle. Extreme reliance on tech leads to physical atrophy.
Makes sense. If machines do everything.
Right. Bodies weaken, shrink,
Ugh.
and maybe emotional atrophy too. This communication is purely logical, technological. Maybe emotions just sort of fade away.
So they lose their humanity.
That's a key theme. A potential loss of spirituality, empathy, deep emotional connection, qualities they now realize they lack and desperately need to recover. Maybe from us, their ancestors.
Wow. So a dying species, diminished physically, emotionally, facing extinction, and their only hope is us in the past.
That's the core of the theory. Their mission back in time. The most common motivation proposed is a desperate genetic rescue.
Genetic rescue.
Yeah, or a hybridization program. They're coming back to the source, our present, to harvest pure, relatively undamaged human genetic material.
Our DNA, eggs, sperm.
Exactly. Our DNA, ova, sperm, maybe even embryos. They needed to reinvigorate their dying gene pool or create viable hybrids, or basically restart their lineage using our biology.
So those invasive medical exams.
Proponents see them as direct evidence of this. It's genetic collection and experimentation. The hybrid program isn't some weird alien experiment. It's a desperate, maybe ethically questionable act of self-preservation by our descendants.
That completely flips the script. Your abductor is your great-great-whatever grandchild needing your DNA.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
Definitely. Are there other reasons proposed for why they might come back?
Yeah, the sources mention a few others. Maybe they're trying to subtly correct the past.
How?
Gathering info about where we went wrong, environmental collapse, wars, bad tech choices, hoping to maybe nudge the timeline slightly towards their own bleak future.
Or just gathering information.
Could be knowledge acquisition too. Retrieving lost history, culture, or maybe just observation, studying us, the natural human condition they've lost.
Trying to understand what they used to be.
Possibly. And there's a brief mention of maybe seeding the future, leaving something behind now to ensure their eventual existence, which gets into complex temporal loops.
And all of this obviously hinges on one massive assumption.
Time travel, yes. The whole theory requires that these future humans have somehow mastered temporal mechanics, can navigate space-time to get here.
So for people who buy into this, the GREYS appearance isn't just random alien biology.
No, not at all.
They argue it's the logical, if maybe terrifying, outcome of human evolution under these very specific, very dire future conditions.
Exactly. They see the features as adaptations to that future.
Yeah.
Like the large head and brain.
Right, for more thinking.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
In a future dominated by tech, information, intellect is key. So selection, or maybe even genetic engineering, favors bigger brains, bigger heads, Physical strength becomes irrelevant.
Which would explain the small, weak-looking body.
Right. If you're living in a controlled environment, a bunker or a spaceship, relying on machines, you don't need muscle. The body becomes slender. Maybe resources are scarce too, so smaller is better. Atrophied.
Okay. What about those huge dark eyes?
Well, if they live in low-light, underground, deep space, or maybe interact mostly with screens, augmented reality,
Their eyes would adapt.
potentially.
Yeah.
Big, dark eyes might be super sensitive to low light, or maybe optimized for digital interfaces. The solid black look could be, well, anything from specialized photoreceptors to just how they evolved without needing reflection.
And the lack of hair, the pale skin.
Again, adaptation. If you're always indoors, shielded, sterile environments, hair and skin pigment aren't needed for protection from sun or elements. It could be genetic drift, degradation, or modification for those conditions. Hence, hairless, pale gray skin.
Makes a certain kind of sense. And the minimal face. Tiny mouth, nose, no ears.
If communication becomes telepathic, or maybe via neural link.
You don't need a mouth for talking.
Exactly. And if food is like nutrient paste or intravenous, the mouth shrinks. Nose and ears for smelling air or hearing external sounds might become vestigial too, reduced over time.
And that ties back to the reproduction aspect too, doesn't it? The lack of visible organs.
It does. If reproduction becomes totally artificial cloning, advanced IVF, genetic engineering.
Natural organs aren't needed.
Right. They could atrophy naturally over generations, or maybe even be genetically modified away. Explains that asexual appearance often reported.
And finally, the scariest part maybe, the lack of emotion.
Yeah, proponents see this as maybe the most tragic adaptation.
An adaptation to what?
To survival. Maybe emotions were suppressed through conditioning or neurology or genetics to ensure cold, rational decisions were made in their harsh future. They essentially lost their soul, their emotional core, to survive.
And that's why they study our emotions during abductions.
That's the interpretation. They're trying to understand what they lost, maybe even trying to get it back through the hybrid program.
Wow. Okay, it's a really detailed, speculative chain of logic connecting the look to the future. So for believers, what specific parts of the standard abduction story do they point to as evidence for this theory, the future human one?
Right, they reinterpret the classic abduction elements through this lens. A huge one is the focus on the medical examination theme.
How does that fit?
They argue it's not just random alien poking and prodding, it's specifically about genetic sampling because they're facing genetic collapse. The focus on reproduction makes perfect sense if they need our genes to survive.
So the exams have a clear purpose in this theory.
Exactly. It's seen as solving their own biological extinction crisis.
And the hybrid agenda fits right into that.
Perfectly. The consistent reports of hybrid children being shown them, interacting with them. Proponents see this as direct evidence. It's not alien-human hybrids, it's future human-past human hybrids, an attempt to infuse fresh genetic material into their dying line.
Okay, and the physical appearance itself, as we just discussed.
Yeah, they point to the whole package, big head, small body, big eyes, pale skin, and argue it's not just weird, it's a plausible outcome of human evolution under those specific future pressures. It fits the narrative.
What about the telepathy?
They see telepathic communication as fitting too. Maybe it's an advanced psychic ability we eventually develop, or maybe it's a technological interface. Either way, it signifies an advanced, perhaps non-verbal future communication style.
And their coldness, the lack of emotion.
That lost emotion aspect is seen as a key piece of evidence. It's interpreted as a tragic consequence, a warning sign about where our path might lead if we overly rely on tech or suppress empathy. Their clinical study of our emotions is them trying to reclaim something vital.
What about things like missing time? People often report gaps in their memory.
Right, missing time is seen as a direct result of temporal displacement. If you're pulled out of your timeline, manipulated by beings who control time travel, yeah, your perception of time is going to be messed with. It's a necessary byproduct of the process, they argue.
Does this theory also try to address the paradoxes of time travel, like the grandfather paradox?
Some proponents argue it does, in a way. They suggest the mission itself, the genetic rescue, is necessary for their own existence. So intervening isn't just meddling, it's ensuring their own survival, creating a kind of complex, self-justifying temporal loop. They have to do it for them to exist to do it.
Okay. That's a bit mind-bending.
It is. And some see a deeper message, too. The whole thing is warning from the future.
A warning about?
About our current path, environmental destruction, war, misuse of technology. The abductions are seen by some as a desperate, maybe subconscious plea from our descendants. Change course before you end up like us.
And the fact that Greys are often vague about where they're from?
That vagueness of origin fits too. If they are future humans, revealing that would be problematic. Temporal paradoxes, panic. So they keep it vague, maybe saying helpful but unspecific things. It allows the future human idea to fill the gap.
And finally, the point about how consistent the Grey description is.
Yes, the surprising lack of true alien biological diversity. Compared to the infinite forms alien life could take, why are so many reports focused on this one specific humanoid form? Proponents argue this points to a common origin, a terrestrial origin, humanity.
It really weaves everything together into one narrative, doesn't it?
It does. It takes all these strange, disparate elements and creates a single, coherent, though very dark story.
Okay, but, and it's a big but. The sources are also very clear about the major scientific and logical hurdles this theory faces.
Oh, absolutely. Huge hurdles.
So where does mainstream science push back? What are the big problems?
Well, the most fundamental problem, honestly, is the complete lack of empirical evidence for Greys in the first place.
Whether they're aliens or time travelers, we just don't have proof they exist.
Exactly. Zero verifiable physical evidence. It's all anecdotal accounts, personal testimony, often gathered through methods like hypnosis, which science knows can be unreliable, even implant false memories. No bodies, no craft debris, no authenticated photos, nothing solid.
And the time travel part is obviously a massive issue too.
Massive. There's a similar profound lack of empirical evidence for time travel, especially to the past. It's purely theoretical physics territory, full of paradoxes like the grandfather paradox we mentioned. There's absolutely no scientific proof it's possible, let alone that anyone's mastered it.
So if science generally dismisses literal Greys and time travel, how does it explain these abduction experiences people genuinely seem to have?
Mainstream science offers several robust alternative explanations. These are grounded in psychology, neurology, sleep science, things we can study.
Like what?
One of the biggest is sleep paralysis.
Ah, okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's that state between sleep and waking, where you're temporarily paralyzed, but your mind is partially conscious. It often involves vivid hallucinations, visual, auditory, tactile, a strong sense of a presence in the room.
That sounds a lot like an abduction scenario, feeling held down, seeing figures.
It maps almost perfectly onto many core elements. Another explanation is false memory syndrome or confabulation.
Meaning people aren't lying, but their memory isn't accurate.
Exactly. Memory isn't like a video recording, it's reconstructive. It can be easily influenced by suggestion, by cultural narratives you're exposed to.
Like movies or books about aliens.
Precisely. Or even certain types of therapy, like that regressive hypnosis again, which can unintentionally shape or even create vivid memories of events that never actually happened. The person believes it fully, but it's not factual recall.
What about the weird physical sensations? Floating out-of-body experiences.
That could be linked to anomalous temporal lobe activity in the brain. Studies show unusual electrical activity there can trigger all sorts of strange perceptions. Out-of-body feelings, mystical experiences, floating sensations, that sense of presence again.
And if you experience that and you know about aliens,
you might interpret it through that cultural framework, which brings us to cultural influence itself.
Right. The Grey image is everywhere.
It really is. Movies, TV, books, the internet. It creates this shared script. So if someone has an ambiguous, maybe frightening experience, especially at night, like sleep paralysis, that Grey template is readily available in their mind to make sense of it.
Okay. What about the idea of humans actually evolving into that Grey form? Does science support that possibility?
The sources say that's considered highly speculative evolutionary biology. There's no real support for that specific trajectory based on known evolutionary principles or the fossil record. It seems more like we're projecting our current fears about technology and environmental decay onto an imagined future, rather than predicting a likely biological path.
And those time travel paradoxes again.
They remain a huge logical problem. The paradoxes of intervention. If future humans came back and changed anything significant to fix their future, they risk erasing the very reasons they needed to come back or even preventing their own existence. It creates impossible causal loops that the theory doesn't really resolve satisfactorily.
And just the fact that the aliens look humanoid.
Yeah, that could just be human interpretation bias. We tend to anthropomorphize, to see human shapes and motives everywhere. Maybe the most common alien looks human because we are human and project that form onto the unknown.
Makes sense. One last counter-argument mentioned.
Right, the file drawer effect or publication bias. In fields dealing with the paranormal or unexplained, the really sensational, confirming stories tend to get shared and highlighted.
While the boring ones or the ones easily explained get ignored.
Exactly. They end up in the file drawer. This creates a skewed perception, an illusion of consistency and prevalence for things like gray reports that might not reflect the reality of all strange experiences people have.
Okay. So, despite all those really significant scientific and logical challenges, this theory, GREYS as future humans, it clearly hits a nerve. It resonates.
It really does.
Why do the sources suggest this particular idea has such a powerful appeal for so many people?
Well, the sources point to several reasons. Firstly, it takes that primal fear of the alien, the unknown invader, and makes it intensely personal. It offers a human connection, albeit a disturbing one.
It's not just them, it's us.
Exactly. A distorted reflection of our own potential future. That makes the fear intimate, not just external.
And it functions as a kind of warning.
Definitely. A very potent warning from the future. The image of the degraded, emotionless gray serves as this stark, cautionary tale about where we could end up if we mess up technology, destroy the environment, lose our empathy. It gives current global issues a kind of existential urgency.
It sounds terrifying, but is there any weird kind of hope in it?
Paradoxically, yeah, maybe a sliver. Despite the bleakness, the fact that they exist to come back implies humanity survives in some form.
Ah, okay, so we don't wipe ourselves out completely in this scenario.
Right. It offers this strange, twisted kind of hope for survival, even if that future looks pretty grim and requires desperate measures.
I can really see the environmental message shining through, too.
Oh, absolutely. It works as the ultimate environmental message, metaphorically speaking. If we don't fix things, this is the consequence. Our descendants, scarred by our failures, forced to return in desperation.
And it probably appeals to people who are skeptical of official explanations for things.
For sure. It taps right into that distrust of official narratives. If the theory is true, then governments and science dismissing UFOs and abductions are part of a massive cover-up, hiding the truth about our own potential future from us.
And maybe, just maybe, it's simply a good story.
Absolutely. The sheer power of narrative is huge here. Time travel, genetic crises, existential threats, a desperate mission. It's just an incredibly compelling, dramatic story. It hits all those sci-fi and horror buttons, regardless of whether it's factually true.
And it does offer an explanation for some of the weirder parts of the abduction reports.
Right. It provides a seemingly logical motive explaining the why. That genetic rescue idea gives a clear, desperate purpose to the invasive procedures and the hybrid focus, which can sometimes seem random or inexplicable in purely extraterrestrial theories.
Well, this has definitely been a deep dive into a theory that's, wow, fascinating and deeply unsettling in equal measure. We've laid out the classic gray description from the accounts, explored the dark logic of them being future humans, looked at that speculative evolutionary path,
Considered the evidence proponents cite from within the narratives themselves.
and then balanced it against those significant scientific and logical counterarguments presented in the source material.
And we touched on why this specific story, this particular theory, seems to resonate so strongly. How it plugs into our fears about tech, the environment, losing our humanity.
Yeah, it really highlights how our anxieties about where we're headed can shape how we interpret the unexplained things happening now.
Exactly. This theory takes the ultimate unknown, the alien, and reframes it. It's not totally other. It's a potential, terrifying consequence of our own choices. The abductor becomes a reflection of our own possible destiny.
So for you listening, what does this all mean? Maybe the next time you see that iconic gray image, you'll pause. Consider the possibilities we've talked about, based on this material. Are they truly visitors from another star?
With unknowable motives?
Or are they something else? As the theory suggests, maybe a desperate echo of our own future selves, a deformed warning sent back down the timeline we're living right now, meeting something that only we, their ancestors, possess.
The truth. Well, for now, it remains one of those big unanswered questions, doesn't it? Lost somewhere in the unknowns of space-time and maybe the depths of our own imagination.
Definitely something to ponder further on your own.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.